real life, and this is about copyright protection. So this is something that's actually really interesting to me, just because mostly this is what my degree is in. So copyright is basically that ownership of laws, music, blogs, anything that you create, any online content, is basically copyrightable or copyrighted the minute you post it or otherwise try to do anything with it. These laws can be made more secure through blockchain technology, which is fairly true, but there's some really interesting pitfalls in this. And again, digital content downloads and all the other things that we've got going on, the blockchain could provide some real-time authentic royalty distribution data to content creators and musicians, and you're kind of seeing that in the NFT market right now. But what's interesting about this is that this is a pretty weird innovation. They're saying it's been embraced by a majority of people. There's a lot of interesting things going on in this area right now. You've got to remember that blockchain isn't the solution to every problem, and I think that's where we've hit with copyright. It's interesting, but applications of blockchain will vary from one industry to another, and there's some really interesting just wreckage of companies that tried to do this. And as we kind of go through that, we'll talk about it. And why we're seeing this, we're talking about NFTs. And this is where this gets to be interesting, because in its viewpoint, NFTs are a good idea because someone can then go say, hey, I own this. Well, what they really own is just the link to the picture. And you have to be really careful what you buy, because you may go ahead and not buy everything that you were thinking you were going to buy, like when Spice DAO went ahead and tried to buy a picture book of Dune. So we're getting our ideas crossed as we go through it, and they paid way too much. The market for this was really 22 to 40,000 euro, and not 2.66 million. And they thought that they were buying the book, and they thought that they were buying the license, and they thought that they were buying all these things, where really what they were doing is buying a copy of the book. And that's it. That's all they were buying. So you've got to really be careful what you buy and how that copyright works, because you may just be buying a single use item and not necessarily the rights to the whole thing. And you'll see that with NFTs as well, right? From what I'm understanding, all you're doing is buying the link. You're not actually buying the actual product itself to go ahead and do all the things that you would want to do with it. So you've got to be careful when you're using blockchain for copyright, because you may not be buying what you're doing. So if it's done right, there's been some interesting studies in this, and that there's a really good potential for broadly applying copyright protection and management applications inside the blockchain, making an authentic user knowledge and process around that, right? Blockchain makes it possible to upload copyrighted content and then control licensing and copyright options, manage distribution, because now everybody knows who it really belongs to if it's done right. Also, the blockchain can be linked to smart contracts. And I really like smart contracts because we can actually have a verifiable tamper-proof register of that contract's execution and make sure that everything was done. So smart contracts, is, if done right with copyright, can be a really interesting addition to the whole process. So there's some trials, though. There's some really interesting things that are going on, such as UJO, that are using blockchain and smart contracts to track music and automatically split payments. Now, even more interesting is China has really taken a lead in blockchain. I mean, really taken a lead in blockchain. So they're actually implemented a blockchain-based system for providing ownership of information inside the court system. So it has legal standing, which is important. And then to get better protection, all the authors must do is simply upload their literary works or articles or pictures or music or anything else to a blockchain-based database, which automatically generates your ID, who owns it, when, why, and the identity of the content creator. The problem is insertion fees. If you go and you look at a system like DigitalOcean, we talk about those insertion fees. They're crazy. Honestly, if you're a little guy and you understand the economics of where most people are going to not make money off their art, an insertion fee of $252 per item is ridiculous. That's just not going to happen unless you've got money, unless you're willing to back it up, unless you already are rich and famous. So again, it's kind of interesting that there are some now new trials and barriers inside of that. Because authors simply don't understand how the technology works. They don't understand why they have to pay an insertion fee. They don't understand how this will stop someone from stealing their stuff. So bringing us back to NFTs. right? Non-fungible tokens. Now, again, this is the hottest of hot topics in art and intellectual property right now. This is where they're thinking that it's going to go great, but we're already starting to see burnout, especially with that last bit with Spice DAO. Yeah, that was probably not really how you wanted to spend $2.66 million. Everyone was probably really happy that it reached that amount of money and someone got that amount of money, but you've now blown out the market. So you didn't know what you were buying. The underlying functionality of NFTs has larger implications for protection of trademarks and copyrights because of its reliance on blockchain technology. And we're not really sure if it's the creator that mints each creation with a unique identifier in practical terms. So the creator can ensure their attribution information is permanently part of the NFT, and that in some cases royalties may automatically issue when the art is shared. But do we really know that that's the person that actually created that art? And we'll kind of go into that here in a little bit, because, you know, as along with all things, when we're gold rushing, we don't necessarily care who it really belongs to. So while the creator can track some transactions, is the creator going to spend the time to do it, right? And that's another thing. So when we're dealing with digital items, you know, owners are adopting blockchain to protect music files and other copyrighted protected content, and that's great, right? And streaming media becomes the norm. That blockchain technology can help protect against unauthorized sharing and also help copyright owners audit their royalties. And that is true if there are some things in there. Trademarks, really important. So trademark owners, probably this a little bit more makes sense. It's just the trademark itself to leverage blockchain to protect their rights on that trademark. You can embed a specific QR code, and counterfeiter attempts to replicate that marketing. You know, the rights owner could see if someone was scamming or scanned or did a fake code, you know, that took customer off the owner's legitimate web page. And again, all that data could be stored in the blockchain and make sure that it actually ends up with the proper attribution to the proper company or the proper person. You know, again, it's good for not only taking action against a particular counterfeiter, but for tracking online marketplaces or geopolitical areas with elevated counterfeiting problems. So how that's actually used in terms of trademark information, it's going to be a little bit more interesting when you get into physical goods. You can do this relatively straightforward as a digital good, but Gucci is not going to be able to really do that leverage of the blockchain unless each item is individually marked, and then that individual mark to ensure that's Gucci authorized content. And that's one way of dealing with it. You're going to have to take some extra steps here. So issues in the copyright system, and this is the big one. There is a huge lack of information who really owns a digital item. When you go onto Facebook or you go onto Reddit or you go on to any other website, even inside of Microsoft Office where I did all this, is it really a stock image, right? Who really owns that digital item? It is so impossible now to go back and find who actually did the picture for that particular meme or that particular item. That its attribution is almost impossible now. A fragmentation of ownership on multiple claims. You may have the person who actually did the art find out how the art was being used, didn't agree with it, and then tried to make a claim, but they can't really make the claim because they can't prove that they were the first ones to do it. You see that in a lot of the automated systems, especially on sites like YouTube or Vimeo, where it's all automated, and you may use a small, tiny, teeny bit of something for education or commentary purposes, and then you get bam, demonetized because we can't make sure that you've got a claim on that. There's a lot of lack of transparency in content usage and payment, so there's no payment, right? I'm a photographer. I have stuff all over the place on SmugMug, on Flickr. I've used DeviantArt, IEM, and just tons of places. And you know, how much do I make? I make about $100 a year on my photography. So I don't know where my content is being used, and there's no way to pay me, or they won't pay me. They'll just go ahead and rip it off of Flickr and go and use it in their news article, and then give some kind of weird honky attribution back. So again, it's weird. There is no payment in the industry. So that's a big one. And that's where maybe something blockchain can really help out with, especially if there's a revenue distribution along the way. And then there's the piracy issue. We've been fighting piracy since day one. Piracy has been a thing since day one. So going back to when the original printing press, right, or going back to the original manuscript, we're going to copy something and we're not really going to care about getting back to the original owner. You know, we have all sorts of rules and regulations around piracy in the digital environment that are also equally as unenforceable or equally not enforced as anything else. So piracy is really kind of an interesting thing. You've got to remember, though, that we've really got two core international laws because blockchain is international. It's borderless. So we have the Berne Convention and then the Universal Copyright Convention. And these two are really going to kind of set that baseline expectation on what you can do. But if you don't have the money, you can't prosecute it. You can't actually get into a court system. All you can do is something like a DMCA in America, and DMCA is American only. And it really ends up just being delisting something in Google. That's really what it ends up being. So contrary to the national copyright law, blockchains are borderless. So censorship resistant. If we went ahead and we put the Federalist Papers up, that could be a problem for some people in other countries. It could be a problem in America. Who knows? But the Federalist Papers are written in the 1700s. Who really owns them? So, for example, someone in the United States could complete a transaction with someone in Switzerland without any centralized intermediary. I could buy that picture. I could do that NFT. I could buy that chunk of music for my video, and then someone else can go ahead and copyright that music later on, and then my video gets demonetized on YouTube because someone had a better copyright claim than I do, and I can't really afford to fight it. So the ability of creators to deal directly with the content consumers and licensees is great, but how do we ensure that it can actually be resold and reused? So leveraging copyrighted works via blockchains is immediately apparent as a good solution, but how do you make it work? And that's where we keep on running into this whole process, because some creators are actually really diving in there and doing it. And if you take a look at what's going on DigitalOcean in the NFT market and other things, they're really exploring this. They're having a good time with it. They're taking a look at it and trying to figure out how to use blockchain to happen. And you have examples that Binded, Ujo, CopyTrack, and Kodak that tried to do a thing, but then you have the digital wreckage, right? So Kodak One project designed to be a clearinghouse of both a cryptocurrency called the Kodak coin and a way to vet who owned what image. Right, it was essentially killed. It didn't make it. It did a great thing in bouncing Kodak stock from $3 to $12 a share when this thing came out. But the way it worked was essentially similar to what we already use in the photography industry: TinEye, Google Images, and Verify. So it really didn't solve a problem. It added a more complex service on top of something that you can do yourself inside of Google or TinEye or Verify. So it died, right? It really ended up being a saga, and just some really interesting things around this as a wreckage of a system to try to work out. So Kodak One saga came to a close in 2020, right? There's a new company now called Ride One, which is just a copyright enforcement operation, and it's not that big a deal, right? The last mention of it was in 2019 in the 10Q, where Kodak actually mentions it. And again, you have that stock price that bounced. So it didn't really work. Bringing us back to NFTs, right? NFTs is really where the whole idea of copyright protection has gone right now. So it's a blockchain equivalent of real property records. And again, we had that problem too back in 2008 when the housing market imploded. No one knew who really had the record of ownership for a house. There are a lot of things like that. So blockchain equivalent for an NFT is a real property record, and that's how they're kind of taking it with the Patent and Trademark Office and the Copyright Office, and that's actually not bad. But even this is not immune to theft. So DeviantArt, and I love DeviantArt. I've used DeviantArt in the past, and that was an interesting platform to work with. Just really weird people. The only problem is that DeviantArt launched that new tool that scanned the blockchains looking for third-party marketplaces and alerts members of potential art fraud. 50,000 alerts for profitable NFT infringement since August of 2021. That's a lot. That's actually a lot, but who really owns it? Again, that's the whole idea. So here we go. We have the Sea Maiden, and we had it done by this guy, and then it turned into an NFT, not by the guy. The ownership changed. The ownership was made different, and that's not what happened. So OpenSea and takedowns. Right, OpenSea, their growth problems, so not a big deal. Scammers can grab thousands of pieces of art. You can go to Flickr, you can go to SmugMug, you can go to DeviantArt, you can go to an individual artist's website, you can go to Twitter. Again, art is everywhere, right? And art is already fragmented, and we don't really know who owns what unless you're taking it off of something like DeviantArt. But even then, you can't guarantee the person who uploaded it to DeviantArt or Flickr or SmugMug or Twitter or anywhere else actually owns the picture. So when they did the research on this, they only get charged when and if a piece sells that turns out to be plagiarized. They take it down the day after it sells, but everyone still keeps their cut. So even if I missed on that initial sale, OpenSea can't give back the money, or they won't give back the money. So because the transactions on the blockchain are inherently anonymous, OpenSea has no real way to track down scammers. So you go to a really popular artist, someone that's got a little bit of air going on right now, and you take their stuff and you turn it into NFTs. There you go. That's what you got. So end result is not a happy ending. And it ended up that the guy had to take his stuff down from Liam Sharp, artist for DC Comics, basically said, I'm going to shut down my entire DeviantArt gallery as people keep stealing my art and making NFTs. And that's not fair to Liam, and that understandable. He basically just said, boom, he doesn't have the time to report each one and make a case, which is going to be ignored anyways. And that is very true because the whole DMCA process is automated. Very few people actually get in there and take a look at the garbage that is inside the current takedown DMCA process. And that is a whole other conversation about copyright and how DMCA works, or in many cases simply does not work the way you would expect it to work. So, in summary, NFTs are the current attempt at some form of copyright protection. The downside to NFTs is you really can't guarantee the person making the NFT and selling the NFT is actually the person that owns the art. So from a copyright protection viewpoint, until you can stop that NFT, until you can find the person that actually made that art and get their concurrence that this is something that they want to do, and that can be almost impossible on the internet because of the way things move around. NFTs may not be that whole, what we think it's going to be for copyright protection. It's a beautiful idea, but plagiarism is happening every day in NFT land, and it's understaffed. And if you have 10,000 of these things coming in a week or 1,000 of them coming in a month, you're going to need to automate that DMCA process. And because the blockchain is immutable once it's in there, takedowns are, DMCA is not ready for blockchain at all in any way, shape, or form. Copyright really isn't. Other attempts at this have flamed out badly, such as Kodak one that ended up just not working the way people intended it to work or why they wanted to work. They tied it to their own cryptocurrency. They were doing post on this one. They weren't really going through and taking a look at how things worked. You know, they said they were able to recover money, but that happened after the copyright got pushed out onto the internet. So yeah, no, not quite. So they've got lots of flameouts. Our researchers, meanwhile, other countries are implementing copyright systems and blockchain, and there are limitations on this. So China is a huge leader in what's going on in blockchain and copyright right now. So it'll be interesting watching what they do in terms of court system, in terms of music and video and all the rest of it. Right? So this technology is really early in its development, and there's probably some really good ways of making this work. They've just not hit the market yet. And that's another big issue right now, is that we keep on talking about really, really cool stuff, but we keep on running back into the same old problems that we've had to run into before, which is primarily how do you make sure that the person that's making that NFT or doing that thing is actually the authorized artist to do all that, or an authorized intermediary. So Sony will often take care of stuff for their artists that they sign a contract with. Then how do you transfer the copyright from you to Sony when you sign that big record deal? Again, there's a lot of things that are still open. So this will be a really interesting technology to follow back on, over the years, or maybe come up with some solution to it that is actually really workable and really does take a look at all the nuances of copyright so that there is a happy ending to all this. But again, that's how this is working right now in terms of copyright protection in the blockchain. Lots of interesting ideas out there, lots of flameouts, lots of problems, but it's a problem that probably has a happy ending solution in there somewhere. Thanks much for watching this lecture, and I will see you in the next one.